We got some great guests.
Yes, we have a wonderful topic that we're going to go over. This is our second webinar for the year. AlphaU basically is an education arm that we're continuing to build and add to. And within the first year, which is 2024, this is our second topic. We're going to be going over the NAR settlement decision and how it affects consumers, how it affects industry professionals in real estate, how it affects investors. So really looking forward to it. David, are you excited? You want to introduce? We're going to start. We'll bring in all of our guests. We have three fantastic professionals, experts in the industry, have been in the industry for a long time. They're going to bring tons of value to you tonight.
Yeah, I'm going to kick it off by introducing Amanda, who is the antithesis of like type A, get stuff done, build, grow, take over the world. She's got an incredible background and career in real estate. In only over 6 years, she's transacted on over $150 million in sales. She's got many different aspects of the business that she's involved in. She's done a lot of stuff with new construction and builders and investors. Amanda, why don't you give a little bit of background about yourself from your perspective?
Well, thank you guys so much for having me on tonight. It's really been an honor to be here. So yeah, I've been in the industry for about 7 years now, closed hundreds of transactions. I love working with all people, buyers, sellers, but specifically my niche is working with builders and investors. That's where I really shine. So helping builders and investors from acquisition through to closing, consulting through the process by knowing construction best practices and ways to add value and maximize their profitability throughout the process. So I love working with builders, and my clients have great results. So I'm just happy to be here, and I love working with you guys, which definitely helps my job and what I do.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nadia. Amanda, Nadia. Next, what we're gonna do is we're gonna introduce Anthony. If you can just turn your camera on. Anthony is a licensed real estate broker in New Jersey and PA. He specializes in representing clients in the purchase and the sale of single-family homes, condominiums, income-producing properties throughout the region. Anthony, you've been in the business for a long time. Anthony has lived and sold real estate in Southern New Jersey since 1991. He's an avid cyclist. He loves competitive bicycling, and also just riding in general. If you follow his Instagram or if his socials, you'll see him riding on the weekends. Whenever he's not involved in real estate, you'll catch him on his bike. Anthony, if you could just share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, that's you kind of summed it up. I sold real estate for a long time, long before some of these conversations we're going to start. We're going to talk about today. Really, I think kind of started back 30, just about 30 years ago in the 90s when buyer representation didn't even exist at all. So I lived through that elevation and adoption in our industry, and worked as a salesperson, led a small team for a while, owned a brokerage since 2006. And then in 2020, I was acquired by Compass, and I started coaching real estate agents around the country also in 2016. So I have about 35 clients in different markets all across the country that I coach, owners of companies, team leads, and some single agents. And so yeah, we're all learning and navigating this together.
You were selling real estate when the MLS was a book that was delivered weekly.
We had
little
books.
thumbnails of
little black and white pictures. Yep.
Yeah.
And then finally, Dave, if you want to introduce Michael.
Yeah, my pleasure. So Mike Gomes is an amazing human being. He's the COO of Signature Realty, has had a very interesting background that spans multiple industries that touch real estate. Mike, I'm not lying, as he says. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and share some thoughts there?
What's going on, guys? First and foremost, I think I speak on behalf of the entire panel. I want to thank you guys for obviously inviting us and putting us in a position where we can obviously make an impact to whoever is watching this and whoever will watch this in the future. My name is Mike Gomes. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. I started off as a loan officer for small brokerages, made my way up to Countrywide, and from Countrywide to Bank of America. Then started doing real estate as a real estate investor. I was flipping properties as you know, dated back in 2005 and 6. As you all know, the same story, 2007 happened. Obviously, the market went down. I got my real estate license, fell in love with, the consumer, fell in love with the process of being a real estate agent, and also wanted to add another stream of income to my bucket as I was flipping properties. Fast forward to today, I'm no longer in production. I became part of the leadership team at a small brokerage known as Signature Realty, small at the time, to 2020, around September. We had about 71 agents. 18 months later, I took this company from about 71 agents to close to 450 agents around 2020. And my passion today is obviously being a dad of two beautiful daughters and making an impact on the lives of everybody, or as much people as I can around me at the brokerage. That's my passion. In fact, we had a mastermind today where we invited agents outside of our office and some from our office, and we were talking about the NAR lawsuit amongst a lot of other things. And the reason why we put that mastermind together was really to give as much knowledge and give as much value and context and content back to other people in the industry that can use it. My partner John and I have done a tremendous job as far as growing this brokerage. So we're in a position now where we want to give back our knowledge and help other people get to the level where we've gotten, or even further, right? And that's kind of what I've done on the agent production side with other agents, right? I want agents to achieve the level of success that I did when I became an agent, in 2018, 19, and 20. I got to a little over $550,000 in GCI. And today what drives me is helping people get to that level or even higher, right? That's what it's about. It's not about the money. It's really about the impact that we can make on the lives of people. Sorry, I need a little bit of water. And that's really my mission now going forward in life, right? It's really, how can I make an impact in your life, whether I know you or I don't know you? What's the lasting impression that I'm going to leave with you if I had one conversation with you, right?
And yeah, so Mike, you wear many hats, and like many people in this group right now, many of us are investors. You're an investor, you're a realtor, mortgage professional. So you have a lot of different varying perspectives, and looking forward to hearing about how you look at, and Anthony and Amanda, how you guys are looking at something that was big that happened almost a month ago to the day. We had the NAR settlement, and I want to make sure that every single participant that's on the call understands what it is, how it's going to affect them, how it's going to affect the people around them. If you're in the real estate industry, if you're not, how will this affect you? And ultimately, we are a real estate investment company, Alpha Funding, but just in general, how will this affect the real estate investment community? So I want to start off with Anthony and Amanda. Anthony, if you could start it first. For those who are not aware, can you provide us with a summary of what the NAR settlement is? What is this thing that everyone's been talking about?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously it's a big deal. It's game changing in the industry as professionals, and how it applies to the relationships that we've had, long standing with the clients, with the both buyers and sellers that we represent. So it's a changing landscape into how a couple important communications and negotiations take place. I think the important thing to know, and I talked a little bit about like background, the reality is from a consumer experience standpoint, there's going to be some changes to a couple pieces of information and a couple pieces of like valuable points of negotiation, which are important. As a professional, I think you'll get a lot of different opinions on where our position is with the way all of this rolled out, right? There were a couple of lawsuits that originated literally several years ago, finally came to culmination at the end of 2023 with an actual court decision, but then turned around and there were several settlements that took place in the coming months. The most significant was the one that NAR just agreed to And for the record, also, just by the way, it's proposed. The expectation is that it will be accepted in most of its form of the settlement. There are a couple important components to it. The monetary settlement, I think, is probably not going to change very much. And then the most significant term, which is what I'm going to talk about, I don't think is going to change. There could be some other nuances that are agreed to between NAR, DOJ, and the plaintiffs, but the main item that people are talking about in the industry right now is the reality that in how compensation is offered between listing brokers and buyer agents. And the first thing that I've shared with a lot of my clients over the last couple of weeks is just remembering that the lawsuits didn't start, and the settlement didn't start with consumers like standing on sidewalks with protest signs saying that they felt like the real estate agent either made too much money or there was some sort of injustice, right? Generally speaking, most buyers and sellers are excited about the experience they receive, right? They're overwhelmingly wanting guidance, advisory, like an advisory relationship to help them throughout the process. There's a lot to the process of buying and selling real estate. And for the most part, like that's a consumer experience that I think we've delivered very, very well. There's a couple areas that we haven't delivered super well. One is explaining compensation, right? And then the second thing is the negotiation that takes place on how that agent is being compensated. The two fundamental areas that were problems, mainly for DOJ, were that there is a payment, right? There's a buyer's representative that is being compensated for that service of representing the agent that's effectively being funded by the buyer by their way of actually paying a purchase price, right? So they're funding where that money is coming from to pay the representative. However, they have no say, or they had no say in the negotiation of what their representative earned, because that was tied to a contract that they weren't a party to, which is the listing agreement. Right. So that's item number one. That's a problem that needs to change, and effectively by way of the settlement is effectively changing. The other concern was just the method for how that compensation was represented and the impact it can have on a very important term in the eyes of DOJ, which is steering. Right. For years, we had compensation that was directed and represented through our multiple listing service that showed an agent how much they would be paid when they represented a buyer to sell a property. The problem with steering is there were the practices where certainly there were assumptions in many cases where a buyer's agent would use the knowledge or the information of how they were being compensated to weigh how much of a priority they would place on one property versus another. And so that's also an area where not certainly a practice that should take place or should be enabled or create a scenario created where that can and will take place. So ultimately what the change did was create an environment where a negotiation now must take place between buyer and buyer's representative to determine exactly what that compensation is going to be structured and how it's not going to be tied to ultimately to what the listing agent offers by way of compensation. That's kind of it in a nutshell. I can go a little deeper, but that's the background of how we got to where we are. And then again, the main term is what's that relationship like between buyer and buyer's agent.
Mm-hmm. So Amanda, we were talking about this morning. You were telling me if I were to buy a home, so there might be some somebody who's just a buyer, or if you're in real estate, when you bought a house, you were basically dictated how much you would have to pay these agents, right? It was just assumed. You're told, you're dictated it. And like Anthony was saying, there was really a problem with transparency, right?
Right. The essence of the lawsuit really is to bring more transparency to the marketplace. So as it stands right now, the commission is paid by the seller, and the listing agent negotiates on behalf of the listing agent and the buyer's agent. What they're trying to do now is essentially separate that out, where each person each fiduciary is getting compensated by the person that hired them. So the buyer's agent is negotiating their compensation with the buyer, and the listing agent is negotiating their compensation with the seller. So that is being split out now, where previously the listing agent was kind of rolling the commission for both parties. And there was no transparency for the buyer on how much the buyer's agent was getting paid. So when Anthony was referring to steering, in some markets and perhaps some agents, if the commission was very low, maybe 1% or a flat fee for the buyer's agent, what the lawsuit is alleging is that some agents were steering buyers away from those listings and showing them listings that were paying higher commissions. So with the lawsuit now and the settlement, there's going to be more transparency, and that whole thing is being eliminated. And there's transparency with the buyers' agents on and the buyers on how much their agent is getting paid, and with the seller and the listing agent on how much they're getting paid.
So if a buyer was looking to buy a home in a certain price range, you were saying that they could show multiple houses, but what were you explaining to me this morning about the differences? Like you were saying it ultimately boils down to transparency, but the steering part of it, the fact that the buyer may not know what the actual commission was, right? And then the buying agent could then take them to a certain house, but they didn't really know what they were ultimately going to pay. And it could have been just as well something higher at a higher commission.
Right. Most of the listing sites right now don't list out how much compensation the buyer's agent is getting. So it's really a mystery for the marketplace on how much their agent is getting paid. You end up finding out on the final HUD or the CD. So the lawsuit is trying to eliminate steering and agents essentially showing properties that maybe have a higher compensation for the buyer's agent, and bringing those buyers to those properties, or trying to sell those buyers on those properties, when really buyers are supposed to have buyer's agents are supposed to have a fiduciary for their clients, regardless of what the compensation is. You're showing that buyer the best property that's suited for them.
My next question was going to be the effects that it has on consumers, but I think we've kind of really touched on that, is that the buyer is going to be much more aware, and they're going to be able to see and know much more than they did in the past. So that's great.
Do you foresee buyers hesitant to sign up with a buyer's agent and compensating them directly? Like, because, a lot of first-time buyers struggle with down payment, let alone coming up with some extra money to compensate. And I know there's a lot of different ways that they're talking about it and agents are talking about it. I mean, maybe Mike, you can touch on this, what you're seeing and how you think that's going to work.
Yeah, and that's the concern. The concern is that now, during the onset of your relationship with a buyer, the buyer's agent has to have that conversation and they have to negotiate their commission. My concern, being in the position that I am, is for low to moderate income buyers, FHA and VA buyers, where most of them or many of them have just enough money for their down payment, in some cases, not even for the down payment, but just enough money for their down payment and for their closing costs to commit to paying a buyer's agent, whether it's 1.5%, 2%, 2.5%, 3%, depending on the experience journey that they're going to get. I don't know if that's going to create friction amongst buyers in the lower down payment tier bracket. And that's yet to be seen, because the rule is not into effect until July. So that's my major concern. That's the only impact from an adverse standpoint that I think it may have. It could put those buyers at a disadvantage.
I do think that a lot of finance tools may come out that might solve some of that issue. Anthony, it looks like you have a comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's it is a fundamental concern. And one of the things that they were talking about, the concept of decoupling commissions and making it effectively not like legal practice for a seller to be able to pay a buyer's representative. That was not a part of the lawsuit. All the lawsuit said was that the representation of the fee could not be made a part of the listing details in MLS. And so you're right. I agree. I mean, the vast majority of my career was exactly what you were describing. It's, entry level first time home buyers in South Jersey, where they're scraping together every dollar they can get to complete closing and to come up with another couple of percentage points for representation that they deem important. And once,
Right.
while they're willing to pay the sales price, coming up with that in cash is not necessarily in the cards for a lot of people. I don't fundamentally, this all, again, I'm dialing back the clock 30 years. There was no buyer representation when I first started. Everyone was a seller's agent. And then collectively, our industry, right, us as an entity, NAR, realtors, policymakers, collectively decided that they felt buyers were owed that fiduciary relationship that sellers had all of the prior time. So at that point in time, agency law was created, slightly different in each state, but it was created ultimately in each state and rolled out over the course of over a number of years in the 90s. Compensation structure was never changed because it wasn't really deemed necessary to change. The way the system functioned well, right? Buyers are coming to closing with a lot of obligations to come up with money to complete the purchase. Sellers are in an equity position, receiving the benefit of the proceeds, and have the ability to pay compensation for the management of the transaction that occurred. So it was never a problem until now, effectively 12, 15 years later. There was talks about it that started literally years ago, but ultimately we get to this point, and that's been the process. So how the compensation model is really how compensation is offered is a question.
I had a follow-up question on the buyer representation. Maybe I'll go to Amanda on this. As far as open houses, right? It's interesting because you're holding yourself out to the public and people are coming in. Obviously, there's going to have to be signed disclosures right up front. But how is that going to work? Like, are agents going to then look to get a compensation from them as a buyer's agent, or are they just going to be satisfied with working for the seller and then signing off some, like, talk through an open house and those relationships, and the rest of you could chime in too.
Well, the regulations have yet to be finalized for open houses. Where it is changing definitively is having those buyer agency agreements upfront before showing an open house, before showing a property. So the days of someone getting maybe a Zillow listing and then meeting the person at the property and opening the door and showing them the house, those days are over. Before you show a property, you have to have a buyer agency agreement signed. Very much like when we go on a listing appointment, now we're doing the same thing for a buyer consultation, and you're showing the value and the benefits and your value proposition for the buyer, and they're determining whether they want to hire you as their representative or not. So while the NAR hasn't come up with official open house regulations yet and what will be required in terms of buyer representation, and if you are showing them the house, you do need to have that buyer agency agreement before you can before you are their representative on that property.
And Amanda, we were talking about that this morning. They never, like recently, the enforcement of it, you could start working with an agent as a buyer, and a couple weeks in, a month in, like there was really nothing holding you to that agreement with your agent versus, a handshake or maybe a verbal agreement. You could just ghost them and then go to another agent. You go to an open house, you meet another agent, and now, on the listing side, you're being held to that agreement. But on the buyer side, I'm sure from a realtor standpoint, do you see that as a positive or do you see that as a negative? All three of you are realtors. Do you see that as a positive or as a negative being enforced now?
I think that's probably one of the best things to come out of the lawsuit. For far too long, some realtors were considered professional door openers, and a professional real estate agent that you're hiring is way more than a door opener. So a real estate agent should be explaining the process and delivering value and helping you understand the negotiations and everything that goes into the process. Opening the door is just the first step, but there are hundreds of steps that follow that. So I've been doing buyer agency agreements, and I think any professional, really professional real estate agent has already put this in practice. I do not take any buyers out before having a buyer agency agreement, because just like if you were going to the doctor or hiring an attorney, you need someone that you know, you would go there and you would sign the paperwork with them. And it basically says that, hey, I have a fiduciary responsibility to you as my client, and this is our agency relationship. And without explaining that and having that consultation up front, you're really doing a disservice. And it really, you know, has set the bar low for real estate agents, and why I think a lot of real estate agents, you know, have a bad, you know, reputation. But the standards in real estate should be much higher, and I think that this is a great thing for our industry, just elevating and forcing people to have those conversations, be able to deliver value, and you know, show why that person should hire you as their representative, and negotiate your commission. You know, a lot of what we do and the value we provide is in negotiations. So if you can't even negotiate your commission, if you're representing them as a buyer, how are you going to negotiate their commission, their purchase price later on?
Michael, Anthony, positive, negative?
I agree with that. I think that, you know, Amanda hit the nail right on the head. I think the best thing that came out of this lawsuit is the buyer agency agreement. And I say that because I also agree with Amanda. Unfortunately, for far too long, the bar has been set too low. And this is the best thing, not only for real estate agents that take this, that are continuously working on their craft, and for the consumer. What this is going to do is it's going to separate the real estate agents that actually have the intent of providing real value and that are not professional door openers. And what it will do is it will set the bar extremely high. You know, one of the issues with real estate is that it's got a very low barrier of entry. 75-hour pre-licensing course, you're a brand new agent. And this is probably the only industry where a brand new agent can make the same amount of money as a seasoned agent who's been in the business for 10, 15, 20 plus years, right? So I think that this will, you know, drive agents to obviously now continue to provide value. It will filter the bad agents from the agents that are obviously professional. And, you know, let's be honest with ourselves here. We are selling the biggest asset of a person's life for the most part. This should be treated in a different manner, in a different light. And I love the fact that this is now what has to happen during the onset of a relationship. It creates a lot of transparency. It allows agents that are going to give the best experience journey to actually win, right? And for the consumer, they're going to win as well, because if they're working with a great buyer's agent, they're going to get a lot of value from that agent, from not only the negotiation, but the experience journey, from the stages to the processes that are involved. You know, one of the biggest issues in real estate that I think that a lot of consumers don't realize is that the real estate agent is the glue of the transaction. They're doing a lot more than what the average consumer can actually see or are privy to understanding, right? There's a lot of moving parts, and we're there to make sure that the wheel keeps on spinning. And if somebody drops the baton, we're picking it up, right? And the consumers don't see that, but everybody else, obviously in the transaction, they see it, right? And I'm just sick and tired of seeing real estate agents that came into the business solely for the money and not to, or not with the intent of giving the best experience journey possible to their client, whether it be the seller or the buyer, but specifically buyers, right? I think that buyers really need representation. They need someone who's going to handhold them, because this is a very complicated industry, and every deal is very different from the next one, right? We can do a single family home, or we can sell a single family home, let's say in Westville, New Jersey, where there's no septic and there's no well water, and then you go to Sussex County, and that's completely different. And I've seen buyers agents make a lot of mistakes when they transition from one area to the other. So I think this is going to clean up the industry. This is going to filter the bad agents that really don't belong to be here, that shouldn't be representing a buyer. And I think that for the consumer, I think this is a great thing for everybody.
Beautiful. From the investor side, so we were talking a lot about from the agent side, we've talked about potential consumers, the buyers, and also people that could be selling homes and listing them. From an investment standpoint, many of you on the call are real estate investors. If you're looking to buy investment properties, you may be using your own MLS, or you might be using a realtor themselves. Will there be any differing marketing strategies for investors? And Mike, I want to ask you that one. Do you think that this will cause real estate investors to have a different marketing strategy moving forward?
No, I think that what's most important for investors, especially, when they're going to market their finished product, is to make sure that they're listing it with a great listing agent who understands the marketing and the advertising side of our business, right? That's what a good listing agent knows how to do. And I also think that an investor will understand the value of offering compensation to a buyer's agent, because they're going to realize that that's important as well. I think it's business as usual for investors. I'm pretty sure, wearing my investor hat, I would never not offer compensation to the buyer's agent, because I see a lot of value in what they do as well. So I think it's, like I said, business as usual. Sorry,
Okay.
guys,
No,
gotta
it's
sip
fine.
my
While
first-
you take a sip, you mentioned something interesting, Anthony. Maybe I'll ask you this. There's a lot of confusion over whether sellers are going to be able to offer commission to a buyer's agent. And there's some been question of whether it can be done inside or outside of the multiple listing system. Can you kind of clear the air on that, and what can be done and can't be done based on?
Yeah. Am I able, I'm going to see something real quick. Am I able to share? Yeah, I can. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
All right. So I have this graphic. So like effectively, and so I'm also, just to be clear, I'm of the opinion that there's a lot of kind of dust to settle, if you will, right? Like the settlement is not completely, agreed, or it's not been formally adopted and accepted. But I'm of the opinion that not as much is going to fundamentally change as the industry is fearing, and that when we roll down the road, maybe towards the Q3, Q4 of this year, somewhere to the tune of 70% of transactions, maybe more, are going to look fundamentally similar when we go to closing as they do today. How we get there is going to be a little bit of a different path. This is what I was explaining earlier, right? Right now, the way, or the old way, we have a seller, we have a listing broker, there's a contract, right? We have a buyer's broker, and the buyer, usually there is no fundamental binding contract that establishes the fee. There's a compensation offer that goes through the MLS, right? That, again, like I said earlier, this relationship whereby the buyer is effectively funding this money, right? They're paying the price. They just have no negotiation or ability to discuss this fee whatsoever, because it's a part of this contract that they're not a party to. Moving forward, we have this arrangement where we still have a listing agreement in place. We now have a buyer agency contract in place. There may or may not be a formal offer of compensation. I'll tell you in a second what my opinion, without obviously a clear crystal ball, is. But there will not be the ability to place that concession or that offer of compensation into the MLS, right? Instead, it's going to be based upon a negotiation between a buyer and a seller. The ability for a seller to pay the buyer's broker, that has not been prohibited. And that's what I meant earlier when I said, I think that when we get to the end of when all of the dust settles and the pieces fall into place, I think 70% of the time or more, we see transactions looking very similar, which is compensation coming from the seller to a buyer's broker. The compensation cannot go through MLS. Instead, it's negotiated, and now it all becomes a part of the purchase contract. I saw a comment in a chat about that. Will it be a part of the negotiation? My answer to that emphatically is yes. It's not only going to be negotiated, but it's going to be very clear in the purchase agreement. This is what DOJ wants. This is what realistically I feel makes a lot of sense for both buyers and sellers. And, I don't see it. The reason I don't see it changing that much is for the reasons we talked about earlier. There's a big cross section of consumers out there first-time home buyers represent anywhere between low 30s and mid 30s% of all transactions. First-time home buyer transactions are funded 50, you guys probably know these numbers better than I do, but 50 to 60% of the time by some sort of government product, like lower down payment product. They simply don't have a lot of extra cash asset to make that payment. Therefore, that fundamental change, I don't see changing, right? The way I see things moving forward is I think that there's, we're not going to have a fee structure, publicly or in the among the realtor organization displayed as to what the fee is. And say I'm a listing agent and you bring a buyer, you bring a contract, you're going to bring a contract that's going to say, this is my offer, this is my compensation based upon the contract I have with my buyer, and this is what your seller's going to net. Present it, we go from there, we negotiate accordingly.
So it'll get financed through the seller anyway.
Yep. And you, David, earlier you made a comment about our finance like pillars or processes being put in place. There was just a letter that was issued by Fannie Mae on the 15th that talked about exactly that. They're reviewing right now the fundamental rules around closing cost concessions and what could be deemed allowable closing costs. I see that changing, and I see Fannie Mae recognizing this is the best consumer experience. And I think Fannie knows it. I think NAR knows it. I think deep down most other industry policymaker recognizes that this is the best way to deliver a fair and open, and to take the word transparent, because I think there's a certain element you can look at transparency from both angles, but I think it delivers a great experience to consumers. And I think fundamentally it's going to be similar. We're just going to have those negotiations, which we should.
I have a quick question, maybe all of you could answer. I was talking with someone yesterday and they were questioning whether or not commissions are going to go down, and that's not part of the settlement. It's about representation and about disclosures. But do you see compensation changing, both on the buy and sell side, or do you think it'll remain similar? Maybe Amanda.
I'll answer that question, Dave. I mean, throughout the last 2 decades, right? If a seller wanted to list with a discount broker, they had that opportunity, right? If a seller wanted to list it for 0 fee, they had that opportunity by listing it themselves for sale by owner. I think that when a seller sits down with a professional real estate agent, specifically somebody who is a listing agent, when you hire a listing agent, you're hiring them to ultimately market your property, advertise your property, and get you top dollar, and in most cases, procure a buyer for your home. I believe that it will be business as usual. I think that a great listing agent, somebody like Amanda, for example, who I know very well, she is going to go to a listing appointment, explain exactly what she does, why she should be hired, but at the same time, she's also going to explain the importance of offering compensation to a buyer's agent. Why? Our responsibility as a listing agent is to do what? It's to market that property. We're essentially marketers that sell real estate, right? But in most cases, a lot of the buyers are being driven by a buyer's agent. It would behoove us as listing agents to bring that offer to the seller and say, hey, we have an offer, but it's from an agent, a buyer's agent. Why are we not going to compensate that buyer's agent, right? Why are we not going to do this, that, and the other? I firmly believe that if a seller, right, chose not to offer compensation, I think ultimately that could affect their marketability on their home, depending on what area or what township or what county they're in, right? Depending on the buyer pool. So I firmly believe, just like Anthony, it's going to be business as usual. The way we've been compensating agents will continue to be prevalent as such, right? As it has been for the past 20 years.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the compensation, just because it's not in the MLS and coming, a 5% and then split that way it's going to be changing is the seller is going to be offering a concession, and that concession for the buyer will then be used for the buyer to use to pay their agent. So it will still be very similar. It'll just be worded differently. But that concession is important because the concession gives the buyer ability to use that to pay their agent and or possibly even some of their closing costs, depending on the deal that they negotiated with their buyer's agent at the time of their consultation. So, you know, it's changing what we call it, but instead of compensation, how we saw it previously, it will now be a concession for the buyer, which will help with what we were saying before, especially for those first-time home buyers. They're already coming up with everything that they can to buy that house in the first place. Without offering some sort of concession for the buyer, it will be very difficult for a homeowner to compete in the marketplace, or possibly even price their buyer out if they're not helping with the compensation and offering that concession when their competition is doing so, thus causing that buyer to, you know, steer themselves to a property that will help them with their buyer representation fees.
All right. I have an interesting question. Just follow me on this one.
Mhm.
So you work as a buyer's agent at times, and we'll sit down and get an agreement signed before you take them out. And I'm kind of thinking through my head how this conversation will look going forward, as far as like, hey, you know, that you're going to be representing them. This is what you're going to do as part of the services of the contract, but that you would try to get paid by the seller side, but if not, you would, you know, I would get compensated by you. So then I like move forward and say, when you're making offers on behalf of a client, would you negotiate the deal with the comp in right out of the gates, or try to negotiate the deal and then, you know, you work it out with your client to say, once we negotiate a deal, we'll increase the price, and say, now that we've agreed, we're going to increase the price to you as the seller, and that will come back to us as a commission? You follow what I'm saying?
So in terms of a buyer agent commission, if a seller is offering a concession, a buyer's agent can't get paid more than whatever they agreed to
Right.
with their buyer. So let's just say you're buying $1 million house and the buyer's agent agreed to a $20,000 commission, but the seller is offering a $25,000 concession to cover that commission. It's not like that buyer's agent can take the $25,000. They're taking whatever it is that they initially negotiated with their buyer. Was that what you were asking with your question?
I kind of meandered along, so I didn't have a real question, but I was kind of thinking that what may happen.
Dave,
is
I understood you asking the question as negotiating the commission afterwards. Is that what I
Right, like
understood?
if you say, I'm going to get 2.5% as a buyer's agent, and they say, great. And you tell them, I'm going to try to get paid if it's offered from somewhere else. If it's not offered from another agent, you could negotiate the deal. And if the seller's happy with that price, then you could say, look, we want to pay more money and get that money back as a commission. Is that a strategy that you think will likely happen in the marketplace, or will agents make your offer with the commissions built in initially?
Yeah, I mean, agents will have the ability and can negotiate their commission. A buyer's agent can negotiate their commission with the seller and the listing agent. And it may even come from a portion of the listing agent's commission. That is a possibility. So it will be another component in the negotiation that takes place between the buyer's agent and the listing agent.
Yeah.
Dave, the
Well-
only thing about your statement that, you know, Amanda, I mean, she obviously answered the question correctly, but you cannot request a concession to pay your commission. The concession is to be paid towards the closing costs. Just FYI.
Gotcha. Okay. And did you have something there?
I was gonna say, I mean, I do see that. I think there's going to be a lot of things that's going to fall into the, like, as all the pieces are falling into place type of thing. Will that happen? Yeah, absolutely. People are already talking about it. I don't think that's necessarily I wouldn't consider to be a best practice. I'd rather have a transparent conversation with the listing agent and communicate what my contract what my contract indicates and negotiate from there. And if it's a lesser amount, like here's at the end of the day, if it's a lesser amount, I'm going to do everything I can to have a conversation and help them understand, like, what are we really focused on? The seller has a goal in terms of a net, right? The buyer has a certain budget. When you look at that buyer's budget, if a portion of it has to be allocated to pay me separately, that reduces the amount they're going to be able to pay you. So is there a savings? Right. And that's really what I think I would drive to communicate and negotiate. Where I think we have some areas that are going to be challenging for us is in some of these markets where they're still heavy, like supply demand imbalance, real strong seller markets. And there are going to be challenges in those cases. And there's going to be buyers that are at the top of their budget. And there's going to be a seller that's drawing a line in the sand, and where there's going to be multiple offers, and offers are coming in with
it's
different.
probably no different than people waiving inspections and other things, right? They're trying to make themselves be the, prettiest girl at the ball to get picked, right?
Correct. And so that could be a part of that equation. And the way I've looked at it is, though, like when you look at the steering conversation, I've always been the type that's like, I've had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder when it was even merely suggested that I was just in it for the money. Right. Like it was almost an immediate reason for me to be turned off and not want to work with that particular client. I don't know why, it just was the way I'm programmed. It's my own, I guess, non-benefit. But anyway, so the reality is I don't want to, I want to create the best outcome and fulfill my fiduciary duties to that client. No one deal is like worth my career.
Right.
So steering was never like a thing in my eyes. It was, I might have a beer with Matt and be like, man, that was a drag. But it's not going to be a part of the transaction. It's not going to be a part of me withholding information or the ability to look at something. Like I want the best outcome for that person, because it's going to be a long relationship. I have clients that I've been working with for 25 years.
Well,
so that's
all
always
you
been
guys are top professionals, and other agents that I know that I consider true professionals, I think, share that same common thought. Right?
I agree.
And that's what
Michael said very well. I'm sorry.
That's what separates hopefully the agents that will thrive and shed off some of these people that maybe are just doing what's purely best for themselves rather than for the client.
Yeah.
We're no longer the gatekeepers of that information anyway. I'm not so concerned with that, and I'm sure Anthony can agree with this. I mean, the last 5 to 10 years, the average consumer has the same information as we do. In fact, in most cases, they're getting inventory faster than we are because we have to manually log into an MLS, where they just go on Zillow, right? It's already syndicated and they have their criteria. And all of a sudden they get an email or a text or an alert from Zillow that this listing pops up. And then the client will call up their agent and say, hey, I want to go see this property. And in most cases, agents are like, which property are you referring to? So we're not the gatekeeper of that information anymore. 10, 20 years ago with pocket listings, et cetera, where it was a little bit more prevalent. I can understand that being a concern. It's not a concern anymore, because there's a reality. If Anthony or if we're working with a buyer and that buyer wants to see a property that is not offering compensation, they're going to see it, whether it's with us or with somebody else. They're going to see that property, right? So it's almost impossible for us to direct or influence a buyer on what property they're going to buy based on commissions. I just think it's going to be, I don't think that's a conversation anymore today. 10 years ago, yes, but Zillow and many other syndicated websites, Trulia, Realtor.com, et cetera, they've really given the consumer the upper hand regarding the information that's out there as far as the inventory. Right. I mean, there are some listing agents and some buyer's agents that may have some off-market properties because of the office that they work for. Right. If they're a heavy listing agency, that obviously puts them in an advantage in terms of providing inventory to the buyer. But as far as, because I know somebody commented, one of the attendees, referring, steering or directing or influencing, agents aren't really doing that. Unless they're working with a buyer that's not very educated on how to search for properties, which today with technology, everybody's leveraging technology. For God's sakes, my 8-year-old and my 4-year-old, they're doing that now, right? Probably as good as us, if not better. So I don't think that's a big problem. I think the problem really, for agents and for the consumer was really giving buyers the opportunity to negotiate their commission. Sellers have the opportunity, buyers didn't, right? So the decoupling of those commissions was simply to create a free market where buyers can come in and negotiate their commission the same way a seller can negotiate their commission with a listing agent, right? And I have to agree with you. I think that this isn't going to change the way we practice real estate. It's just going to cause us to adapt, right? And it's going to, in my opinion, it's going to make buyer's agent better at what they do. And, Amanda said something 15, 20 minutes ago, which is the truth. Professional door openers, rather. Worse, what other industry, guys, can we get a license, take a 75-hour course, and in your first year make high 6 figures? This business, you could do it. I know I've had 30, 40 agents in their first year just, come in and make 100, 150, $200,000 their first year. And many of them are great agents, but there's a lot of agents that I'm not going to say that do not deserve it. There's just been a lot of agents out there that haven't represented their client, their buyer, the way they should have been represented, right? And this is the backlash. The backlash is exactly this. This should have happened 5 to 6 years earlier, in my opinion. It's happening now, and it's happening now because of the past 5 to 6 years and how many agents have come into the marketplace, right? New Jersey specifically, there's 59,000 agents. We're one of the smallest states in New Jersey. I'm sorry, states in the country. But yet, we have the 4th most amount of licensed agents in the country. We're tied with New York. New York has 59,000. So do we. The only other 3 states that have more agents than New Jersey is California, Florida, and Texas. Right? This is an industry where you can really feed your family. You could put your kids to school. Let's treat it that way. Let's all be professional. Let's clean up our act. And I think that this lawsuit did exactly that. And for great agents like Amanda, great agents like Anthony, great agents like a lot of agents around my circle, what's going to end up happening, the end result is that they're going to chip away on market share that they would have not had. And their value now is going to be a lot more apparent in the marketplace because now their craft is going to shine versus the agent that isn't really doing what they're supposed to do, right? The professional door openers. So I welcome the change. And I think that, speaking on behalf of Anthony and Amanda, we welcome the change. I think it's great.
Yeah, you guys just answered one of the next questions. If anyone has any questions, we have a bunch of participants on the call. If you have a question that you want to ask Anthony or Michael or Amanda, please put it in the chat. We'll answer as many as we can before we start to wrap up here. I mean, you guys already answered it. Do you think this is going to be a net positive or a net negative? And it seems like you guys are all looking at this optimistically and also with the right perspective.
And it's funny because there are agents that are on 2 sides of the spectrum when it comes to the NAR lawsuit. There's the doom and gloom agent. Oh my God, the industry is going to change. I'm going to go get a full-time job. And then there's the agents like us 3 here that are saying, no, guys, this is great for us, right? Here are the reasons. Boom, 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 right? And you're either on one side of the spectrum or you're on the other side of the spectrum. You're not in between. Are there some concerns, some small concerns with consumer behavior or advantages of this? Yeah, but we'll find out come July what's going to happen. But as far as best practices, I think that the consumer wins because ultimately when they're working with that buyer's agent now is going to work really hard on the behalf of that consumer, and they're going to become a true professional as they should be.
And I was going to ask, why do you think so many people I've seen it on social media, talking to a lot of professionals in the business at networking events. Why do you think they think that this is all doom and gloom? What's been the feedback?
They haven't. Oh, go ahead, Matt. You do it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, anytime that there's change, people get nervous. And anytime there's confusion, it leads to fear. And fear can lead to paralysis. Like when COVID was happening, there was fear about the industry and what we were going to do, and we weren't going to be allowed to do open houses anymore, and all of this nonsense about, you know, how the industry is going to change. And we adapted, and it was fine, and it actually made us better as an industry. And I'm sure when realtors were going through the listings on their paper book, and then it switched to online websites, and now we're no longer the gatekeepers, there was fear about how the industry was going to adapt then. And it's just the next evolution in it. And I think that the true professionals know that every industry and the way to adapt is to grow. And we can't change what's happening. So how can we take the bull by the horns and run with it? And just being ahead of what's going to happen. This is happening in July. So taking the necessary steps now to understand what's happening, to strategize about how these changes are going to affect our business. That's what's most important, and not to be fearful of the change, but to embrace it. And you can't change it. So, you know, just roll with it at this point and learn to find the good in this situation, which there's plenty of.
Anthony,
There was a
Mike,
question that just disappeared. I think.
Yeah, I saw Michael answering it.
Yeah.
So I think the
yeah,
answer.
if
If I'm
the question,
signing with the buyer's agent and agree on 1%, but the agent has other buyers at a higher percentage, could that affect which offers a buyer agent pushes?
So I view it's a good question, and it's a completely natural question. But it was posed to a buyer's agent. The amount of times in my career, and I'm dealing with smaller price points than these guys, who I had to do a lot of transactions. We did a lot of transactions. The amount of times in my career where I had multiple buyers interested in the same property, it happened, absolutely. But did it happen at such a common rate that would be a major concern? No. And then the other thing is so I'm going to present offers, you know, fairly and uphold my fiduciary responsibility, knowing that if someone just simply makes a stronger offer in whatever is going to be the most attractive offer to that seller, the other buyer is still, you know, that was a seller's decision. The other buyer is still going to ultimately buy something, hopefully, right? You would assume, if the relationship is maintained and you deliver a great experience. So it's not going to change the outcome. The strength of their offer and the guidance that they follow to make a strong and attractive offer in a case like that is going to be what's most important. A difference of 0.5% or 1% is usually not the deciding factor in a seller's decision as to what they're going to accept. There are a lot, as these guys both said, there are many other terms to the contract that can be just as or more important than, you know, 0.5% or 1%.
Yeah, and I agree with Anthony on that, right? There's many facets to an offer. You know, a lot of people think that it's just about price, and it isn't, right? There's more to an offer, such as terms, contingencies, provisions that sellers and listing agents obviously put a lot of stock and value on, right? Just because you're the highest offer, or just because, you know, in most cases, a seller, let's say if they were to net more money, that doesn't mean that's the more attractive offer for them, right? There's a lot that is weighed when an offer is reviewed and processed and accepted. You know, I've seen, even with myself, even on the investment side, in making an offer of $30,000-$40,000 less, and I get it accepted over another offer that's much higher. Why? It's not about just the price. It's about the offer. It's about the terms. It's about the presentation, how a buyer's agent sells that offer or presents that offer to the listing agent. Sometimes it's a matter of a relationship. Like if Anthony and I have, done deals together, and let's say we've done 10, 15 deals in the past 5 years, right? And I'm coming in with an offer in which, we requested 2% compensation, and there's another offer that's the same price and it's 1% compensation, but Anthony knows that I'm going to close and that I ultimately am good at controlling emotions throughout a transaction. Anthony may tell his seller, hey, look, I've dealt with Mike 10, 15 times, and it's always been a smooth transaction. Very confident in him and his abilities to get this to the closing table and ultimately do what's the best thing, which is closing it, right? So there's a lot to it. There's a lot that's discussed rather than just the net proceed, right? It's who's going to close. That's another conversation. Who's going to make it a smooth transaction, right? What are the terms? Does the seller need 45 days? Does the seller want a quick closing? Does the seller want a use and occupancy? Right? What's the inspection contingency look like? Is it limited? Is it waived completely? Right? There's so much that goes into an offer that the sellers aren't just looking at the compensation. You're really looking at other stuff. I think that's just one small aspect of it.
Right. And which also brings home the point of having a great buyer's agent that is representing you and helping you negotiate on all of those terms, even if you can't win on price.
Love it.
Yeah.
Just wanted to quickly, as we start to wrap up here, if anyone that has watched the webinar tonight or is going to be watching the webinar, if they would like to contact either Amanda, Anthony, Mike, Amanda, how can they contact you?
So you can find me on Instagram at @Iam_Amanda Nadia, or my website, amandanadiagroup.com, and all my information is there.
Beautiful. And Anthony?
So also on Instagram, it's my first and last name together, no apostrophe as on this video. So it's just Anthony Delicandro. And then website is DWL, which is kind of short for dwell, dwlrealestate.com. And again, full contact information can be found there as well.
Beautiful. And then Michael?
For me, you can same thing, Instagram, _Mike_Gomes. I think if you guys can see that. And then
Lots
you
of
want to email
followers
me.
there, huh?
Oh yeah, Instagram famous. And then if you want to email me, you're more than welcome to do so at M as in Michael, my last name, Gomez with an S at the end, at signaturerealtynj.com.
Wonderful. I want to thank all three of you for coming on tonight. You guys are busy, heavy hitters. You guys are fantastic. I know you all personally, and I really appreciate you guys coming on tonight. You guys added tons of value. I've already had some people reach out thanking you guys and thanking us for the webinar. Hope everyone has a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of your year. We're going to be on in the third quarter, so be ready around the summer, fall time for our next AlphaU webinar. Topic's going to be very interesting. Looking forward to it, and hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
Great meeting you guys.
Bye.